Diving Deeper Discussions. I'm your host, Randy Isaac, on behalf of the American Scientific Affiliation. And on these programs, we have a discussion with the authors of various publications in our journal, The Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. Today, we conclude our 3-month discussion of the September 2024 issue of the journal. The article we're discussing today is entitled Contemporary Challenges to the Pursuit of Truth, and we're delighted to have the author, Keith Miller, with us. Welcome to the program, Keith.
Thank you very much.
Okay, now, Keith, you've been an ASA member for what, about 40 some years or more?
Yeah.
And most people in ASA know you because you and Ruth faithfully have attended virtually every annual meeting since then. But I suspect there's some new folks around who don't know you as well. So let's take just a few minutes to introduce you to everyone. So tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised.
Yeah, I was born in New Holland, Pennsylvania, Southeast Pennsylvania, in Amish and Mennonite country. And after going to Franklin Marshall College, which was in Lancaster.
You didn't go far from home.
Yeah, that was, just a half-hour drive.
Mm-hmm.
I then went to get my master's degree at State University of New York at Binghamton. So upstate New York, and then went from there to Rochester, New York.
Still staying close to home.
Well, it was, it's 2 states away, a state away. And that's where I got my PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And then after...
that was in geology, right?
Yeah, all 3
all
of
your degrees in geology.
Yeah.
So before you go on to that,
Yeah.
what got you interested in geology? Why
Yeah.
that?
My parents were always very aware of the natural environment and very conservation minded.
Mm-hmm.
And really encouraged curiosity. And so I grew up being interested in just about anything nature-wise and observations. And so when I was in high school, I got especially interested in earth science. I had a really good earth science teacher in 9th grade.
It makes all the difference, doesn't it, to have
that pushed me in that direction.
Influential teacher, right?
And so I'm an unusual geologist in that that was the direction I knew I wanted to go when I entered college. Mm-hmm. Most geologists that I know didn't find geology until they were in college.
Right.
Oftentimes they going into engineering or pre-med or something, and they realize that wasn't their thing, and on a whim they take a introductory geology course and say, oh, that's really cool. And but I've always been kind of directed that way most of my life.
Okay, so what'd you do after your PhD?
Went to South Carolina for a year and a half in Clemson.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, as a visiting assistant professor.
So does that mean you have to root for their football team every time?
I tried to avoid it, which was kind of hard. That was quite a culture shock going from
I'll bet.
University of Rochester to Clemson, where football was kind of on the top of the scale. But it was a revolving door. It wasn't a permanent position.
Okay.
And so I was looking around for someplace else to go. And at the time, it was really hard to get a faculty position without first being a postdoc.
Mm-hmm.
And so made some inquiries and connected with a faculty member in Kansas, and Ron West, and he put together some money for me to start there as a postdoc, and that eventually turned into an assistant, research assistant professor position
So this is Kansas State, not
at
Kansas,
Kansas
right?
State.
Yeah, right.
So I
Okay.
did almost all my, well, I did almost all my professional work at Kansas State.
Aha. So that was your entire career, really, until you retired.
Yeah.
Hmm. And now you are living.
And after retiring, went back to mostly back home again. We're living near Morgantown, which is
Hmm.
actually a property that my grandfather owned.
Oh, really?
Pennsylvania, Morgantown, Pennsylvania. Yes,
Yeah,
not
right, right,
Morgantown, West Virginia.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
that It's a 65-acre property
Hmm.
that was willed to me by my grandfather, and it's now a focus of our efforts as far as uh, um,
That's
being
terrific.
key to
Yeah,
our interests in conservation, and
yeah.
so
That's outstanding.
how to care for that piece of creation.
So where in this journey did you meet Ruth?
In graduate school, we were in
Oh,
Rochester.
okay. You were there at the same time.
Yep,
A- And she went with you to Clemson and all, or when
yep.
did
Oh,
you get
yeah,
married?
yeah.
Yeah, you got
We
married.
were married before we left Rochester.
Good choice. It's worked ever since. Yeah. So tell us just a little bit about your faith background.
Um, my parents were very strong, committed Christians, extremely involved, um, very involved with youth.
Was this
Um,
a Mennonite background or being
no,
in
that
that area?
wasn't.
But it wasn't,
It was a
despite your surroundings.
reformed church, actually. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, basically
Okay.
a reformed church. Um, and I through both while there, I mean, they often would visit other congregations, other denominations, other groups. And through my life, I've been in an extremely wide range of congregations,
Hmm.
from charismatic Catholic to 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 non-denominational to
Hmm.
um, wide range of Protestant denominations.
Hmm.
And I really value that experience.
Hmm.
It's been very formative
Okay.
for me.
So how did you find out about the ASA and when and where and how did you join?
That's interesting. I was in my master's at Binghamton, and my parents happened to hear a radio program in which I don't know who it was at the time. I don't remember. But they heard someone from the ASA being interviewed on the radio,
Hmm.
and they thought that might be something was interested in, and they told me about it. And I inquired, and I joined the organization. That was, I guess, 1982, 83, I forget which.
Hmm. You couldn't join online at that time, could you? Yeah. Yeah.
So, and
That's
then it took a
great.
number of years before I went to my first meeting. And since then,
Hmm.
as you said, we've been pretty faithful and missing a couple, but pretty faithful in
Right.
going to the
Yeah.
national meetings.
Well, you have published a number of articles in the journal as a geologist, so this is a bit of a change. So tell us a little bit about what drew you to this topic and what led you to write this particular article.
Yeah. One of the things that I did, other than teaching, which was a big part of my responsibilities, I was more of a teaching faculty than I was a research faculty. Um, but I did a lot of public science literacy, a lot of public outreach. And that was because the two fields that I ended up concentrating on as far as my teaching and research was um, evolution
Hmm.
and climate change, climate science.
Hmm.
Uh, which I'm sure everyone is aware of, have been fairly controversial topics within a large segment of the Christian
Hmm.
church. And so I found myself in this kind of bridging position between science and faith and topics that many people felt uncertain about or felt conflict with. And so I did a lot of speaking at churches, at community groups, at colleges, at pretty much any venues that would invite me. And in the process of that, I started seeing and through my teaching, what were the kind of misconceptions that people brought
Hmm.
to the issues. I started really looking into the nature of science, and that became a big part of components of my teaching was incorporating the nature of science, and then other things that I saw as barriers to people being willing to seriously consider scientific claims.
Hmm.
And I've actually
Okay.
written some of my ASA articles. One of them I wrote on doubt. And
Hmm.
the reason I did that was both people being afraid to challenge their assumptions, challenge their
Hmm.
beliefs, um, being afraid of uncertainty.
Hmm.
And also people who had been ostracized from their congregations because they expressed doubt.
Hmm.
And those conversations led me to write that article. And then more recently, with COVID and then all the misinformation and um, um, false
Social
claims that
media.
were being made
Hmm.
during that time, the polarization that was occurring added kind of another layer to that. And
Hmm.
that's how this paper came out, trying to put together all those various things that I've encountered
Okay.
in my career and kind of putting it together.
Okay, that's great. And it's an excellent article, and I'm sure our members are eager to discuss it with you. And so, Vicky, if you could open the microphones, all of you will be muted. We ask you that you keep it muted until and unless I call on you at your turn, and then you can unmute and make your comment or your question. And afterwards, please mute yourself again. So we have a couple of questions that were submitted in advance. We'll start with those as we normally do. And for the first time in the 4 years we've had this program, we had two identical questions, or close enough that they could be merged. Steve Hall and David Sanders both asked the same question, and I'll let them both comment if they want. But Steve Hall, you submitted yours first. You want to raise the question that you submitted? Unmute yourself, and I think you're here somewhere.
I don't know if he's here.
You
David
didn't
is
you
here.
didn't sign in yet? Let me see. Nowhere. Okay. Well, David, you've got the load on your shoulder then. I think I saw your name. Maybe it's good we had a duplicate here. We got somebody here. Uh,
I think I'm talking now.
there you go. And go ahead. We hear you.
Okay, I don't see my picture on there, but maybe, I don't know, maybe
That's all
this
right.
new,
I see you. I see you.
okay. I guess it's the new version of Zoom or whatever. It doesn't show.
Yeah, they're always changing things. There's a setting in there where you can do it somewhere. But right now,
Yeah,
just go
I'm
ahead.
not going to try to find it.
Yeah, go
Anyway,
ahead.
uh, reading through my AAAS science issue, which I think was the first issue of July,
Right.
they were reporting on a U.S. Supreme Court case that involved regulations involving herring fishermen. So it involved a U.S. federal agency versus private enterprise, and it what this case did. I'm trying to. Oh, I know. I'm looking for my little uh, iPhone because I took a screenshot of the name of the case.
Mhm.
Okay, Loper Bright Enterprises is the first uh,
Mhm.
party. they're the group of fishermen that operate out of New Jersey somewheres. Anyway, the way the AAAS reported the case, this U.S. Supreme Court decision gave it took away the what had been a doctrine for 40 years, which gave federal agencies the deference in interpreting ambiguous laws. In other words, engineers, scientists at the agencies could interpret how something was supposed to be enforced if there was any ambiguity in the law. And what this recent U.S. Supreme Court decision has done is to throw the onus on the judges. So we now have judges trying to interpret, technical things without any scientific input. They don't have to give any deference to the scientists and
Okay.
engineers at the agency. And so we have, basically legally trained people who might understand English and how sentences are constructed, but they have little idea what the technology is. So,
Okay.
and, it kind of just fits into the, I said it fit into category 2 where experts, we don't value the input of experts anymore.
Okay. So, Keith?
Yeah, I guess my objective with the article is more directed toward the individual and how an individual should pursue trying to know what the truth is, or what is the best approximation to truth that that currently have. So addressing the kind of institutional barriers is something I didn't do. So I think it's important that individuals who are trying to negotiate questions have the skills to pursue truth, to know where to look, to know themselves that they should look at the consensus of the appropriate community, to look for the most valid.
So since judges are individuals, you would say that your article applies to the judges as guidance for how to proceed?
Yeah. I think maybe it's, from my perspective, that it's more important than we from a kind of social structure perspective, organizational perspective, that we work from the bottom up and not expect to get problems resolved from the top down. That as individuals, if we have the skills and know quite what word I want to use, the right tools to search for, pursue for knowledge, it's important. Maybe I'll make a digression here. This actually might apply to what Steve Hall asked. What do I mean by truth in this context? And I think it's a little different than oftentimes people think about. When I use the word truth, I'm referring to what is the real reality, the real nature of the universe, the real nature of a spiritual reality that's out there, independent of us, independent of whether we know it, believe it, or not. It's the way the universe actually is, the way spiritual reality actually is. That's what's true. None of us have that truth in a full sense. We all have parts of it, but no one can claim, make a statement and say, this is the truth. I really resist framing it that way. That's why I titled the article, The Pursuit of Truth. We never attain it, and it'll never be attained because the reality is so much bigger than we are, and in any even potential future, we won't have all of the truth. It'll always be incomplete. And that changes how we look at different arguments. In that it's now, well, I have the truth and you don't. No, I have the truth and you don't. It's how do we both move in the same direction? How do we both approach what is the real truth out there? And which arguments or which positions are likely closer to that reality than others? So one illustration I like to use is you can imagine a flat surface with a whole lot of different dots on that surface, and then above that is a point up here, and that's the reality. That's the truth of the universe. And we're all down here on this flat plane arguing with each other of who's best, when what we should be doing is looking toward in the direction of that truth. And as we all presumably more closely approach that true reality, we'll get close to each other. We're not going to get closer to each other by arguing with each other. Here, we're going to get closer to each other as each of us works toward pursuing that ultimate truth that's beyond our grasp.
So relating to this question here, then, on that Supreme Court case, the judges aren't told that they can't use the input of the agencies. It just says they don't have to, or they don't have to give deference to them, right? So
Yes.
the judge, in their pursuit of truth, can still rely on the experts.
And there's another aspect to it too, that truth is multifaceted. And so one thing I talk about is being cross-disciplinary, not thinking that all the truth is found in one discipline or something. Be able to reach beyond your discipline, and also to reach beyond your cultural bubble. And because there's no group of people that have kind of a corner on the truth. There's other people with other histories, other cultures, other backgrounds that also have some of the truth as well.
Right.
And if we don't look across those boundaries, we're going to miss something of what truth is.
Yeah. Now, I haven't opened the floor for discussion yet, but Bill and Mark, if you're specifically related to this particular question, I'll let you talk now. Is that true, Bill?
My question relates to the use of experts. And
okay, go ahead. It's relevant. Go ahead.
This partly relates to my own experience. When it comes to law cases, legal cases, most witnesses are not allowed to state their opinion, but only I saw somebody do something. But expert witnesses, if they're qualified, can testify as to their opinions. So I've testified in about a dozen court cases, both federal and state, as an expert witness. In the vast majority of those cases, however, the opposing side had an expert witness who disagreed with everything that I said. And I think that gets at the issue is they were theoretically the same qualifications as I had, but they came to different conclusions. So I'm not so convinced, Keith, that there's a consensus in experts. There may be a consensus in the scientific area, but when it gets beyond just science into the law system, there's not a consensus because there are experts for hire, in effect, who will say something against what another expert for hire says.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, I see the same. I mean, the same thing happens. I mean, they bring in scientific experts, and the same thing happens. And I think the same thing happens in kind of public dialogue space, public debate space. There's a sense, I mean, how often is there some topic that's being debated or discussed, and you have, you know, two speakers, and one argues one position and one argues the other position. It seems to be a very common way of presenting things, and I think it is completely misrepresenting reality. And I've been through this a lot, again, in the fields that I've been working with. It's very common, it was and still is. You know, we have someone that comes in to explain current evolutionary theory, and so you bring in a young Earth creationist to counterbalance it, right? Well, if you're going to look at consensus, there is no comparison. And so consensus, I think, in many fields is still extremely important. It doesn't mean that consensus is, certainly the consensus is not completely right, because no one's completely right. But the consensus is much, much more likely to be at least closer to the truth than opponents. And any oppositional position has to earn its right into consensus. They have to do the work, they have to do the persuasion, they have to provide the argumentation that will persuade the consensus. So I think consensus is extremely important. And if it's ignored, it completely distorts the conversation.
Right. I think that's a very important point.
And I think you see all they're going to see is two experts who disagree with each other. And I think frequently that means they ignore the expert opinion of both.
I think that's very likely.
Unfortunate. The judges need to be aware of your article, Keith, and focus on asking questions about the consensus. They have not just the opinion of one person, but it's more a consensus. Okay, Mark, I think you're probably on this topic as well. Go ahead.
For sure. That last topic is why the overturning of the Chevron doctrine is so important, because it's going to become at the arbitrary will of the judges listening to expert testimony instead of the consensus of the experts in the agencies who can interpret some of those laws. So that was part of my comment. But my question, thank you for being here, Keith. Are we living in a post-truth world? And what is your concern about that?
Wait, are you getting off of this topic question here? We're not on open floor yet. Are you covering?
Well, it's okay
over the
if my question, whether it's a post-truth world, is a diversion from the topic, we can delay. So it's okay. Go back to whatever you wanted.
Yeah, I think that's another issue. I think that Supreme Court ruling is definitely of huge concern. But I think you're right, Keith, also that it really is a culmination of individual perspectives that is your focus of your article. And I believe that article is relevant not just for us as a community here, but justices need to be educated along those lines as well to know what to do. So, okay, we've got one more question in advance. Del Kuhn, you can unmute yourself and let's hear from you.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And Keith, thanks for the article. It's a good article, good observations, good summary. My question is, I want to stay away from misconceptions about science, but I want to ask whether there is a strong intellectual tradition behind the, I guess, denial of your conclusions, especially the first three and maybe four, and wonder whether this stems from something like C.P. Snow's Two Cultures, or even somebody putting a higher value than truth onto their activities. And I'll go for Orwell's Nietzschean Will to Power of 1984. So if there's something there for us to understand, what should we be understanding and who should we be reading to try to understand it? And this might slip into Mark's area that he's asking about.
Yeah. I think that the kind of the will to power, desire for power and influence, and also sacrificing truth for the purpose of achieving some other goal or some other end, is definitely there. I guess I see it more primarily among those who are generating the false narratives, who are promoting the conspiracy theories more than the people that follow them. Because I think in some cases, those false narratives are being generated for the purpose of power, whether it's public power, whether it's public influence, whether it's just getting how many clicks on your social media feed. It's pursuing something else other than the truth, and they're using false narratives in order to feed into that. So then the question is, why do people follow those false narratives, which is a different question, I think. Maybe I'll circle around to that. The two cultures thing, I would say fits into one of the things that I talked about in the paper, which was getting out of your own bubble, your own community, because again, any community has a limited perspective, and that's why I think right now my sense is most of the big, even within the scientific field, most of the really interesting, important questions are multidisciplinary. One discipline can't resolve it. And oftentimes it's crossing into social science or psychology or even theology have to be brought in to dialogue to work together for a solution that one discipline can't do it on its own. So, and then there's just the whole cultural thing. I mean, for example, white Western Protestants have dominated many fields, have dominated the historical narratives and everything for quite a long time, shut out other groups, other voices. And so there's a need to bridge those cultures. Because again, those other traditions and perspectives bring in some valuable truth and valuable perspectives. And I point out some of those examples in the paper. Even in science, for example, I talk about indigenous perspectives or African American perspectives that they bring to their science, and it's approached somewhat differently, and they end up drawing out aspects that weren't seen by the dominant culture. So I don't know if that fits into the two cultures thing, but I think it's important to the more we're separated into cultures that don't communicate with each other, we're going to miss out on truth.
Okay.
And maybe to circle back about why do people follow the false narratives? And that, I think, goes back to things I picked up in my teaching, which is students desiring simple answers to complex problems. They want yes or no answers. They really don't like uncertainty. They're really uncomfortable with uncertainty. They really are afraid to doubt the things that they have previously kind of staked themselves on as far as what they believe. And then there's a lot of confirmation bias that they if they are prone to a particular perspective and someone throws out something that seems to jive with that, they're much more likely to glob onto that than another narrative that's in conflict with what they already believe. Your tendency, your ego is to shut that out. I don't want to be challenged by that. I'll grasp onto the things that reinforce what I already think. I think those very human things probably lie behind what drives the followers, what drives people to accept a given narrative or a given false narrative or conspiracy theory.
Okay. Anything else, Del?
Not really. I'm way out of my depth on philosophy, especially contemporary philosophy. I'm aware that question about truth, at least from us in the dead white guy European tradition, has been around at least since Socrates and the Sophists. I suspect I know things have been written since then, but what they are in the 20th century is beyond me.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, Mark, let's get back to you. Why don't you continue your discussion before we rudely interrupted you? Mark, you're still there, right? You got to unmute yourself.
Yes,
Right,
I'm still here.
Go. All right. Good. Go ahead.
So the question, Keith, was what has to do with, are we in a post-truth era? And we see with certain conservative, even in the theological conservative Christian world, some of the conspiracy ideas and all, but even in the scientific community, are there any concerns that we're in a post-truth era where we can't find consensus on what is true or even define what is true? And did that come into play as you were, thinking about your paper? I mean, I'm a purist like you. I hold out on the reality of truth, and I like your definition. And I'm confident that scientists and people of faith will continue to pursue what is true and not only gives power or whatever. Mm-hmm. However, I see a lot of forces at work that are in conflict with that on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one thing to feel like here are some important foundations that need to be in place for someone to negotiate the controversies and be oriented in such a way that they can move toward a position that's more in keeping with the reality that's out there. But yeah, there's so many forces that don't see truth in that perspective. As I say, that there's your truth and my truth. Everybody has their own truth, and so you just have all these competing, mutually exclusive positions. Without the effort that it takes to move beyond that and to I think a big piece that's missing in this is humility. That one thing that I started saying when I give presentations, because I felt it got to the point. One time I was asked at a long time ago at a talk that I gave, what's one thing that you really know to be true? And I said, the only thing I'm absolutely sure of is that there are things that I believe that are wrong. And that kind of threw people. Because that's true. I mean, that really is something that is utterly true. I know that there's a whole universe of stuff that I don't know or I got wrong. There's things that I fervently accept now that 100 years from now aren't going to be accepted anymore. Because, our knowledge is a continuous thing, and it changes over time. Fortunately, it's mostly cumulative over time. We don't go back. We don't reiterate things. We move forward. But I think the more that people would say, there's a lot I have to learn. There's things that I probably have wrong and I don't know they're wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I really need to listen to people that might challenge particular aspects of what I accept. And if I take that seriously and I look into it and I look at the evidence, I look at the consensus, I look at all these factors, and I come to the conclusion, I'm pretty sure that I'm still on the right track with my position. I've actually strengthened what I believe or what my position is. If it turns out that, I didn't there's this piece of information that I didn't have before, I wasn't aware of, and it really changes how I think about this now. If that would be the approach, the more common approach, I think that would resolve an awful lot of the current conflict.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
thanks.
right. Thank you. Got a hand up by David. I don't see your last name. I'm not sure.
This is David Yee. I'm sorry.
David Yee. Okay, I thought it was, but I wasn't quite sure. Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
David.
I have a test case for consideration. I guess mostly involving consensus and one's bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the case for or against vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of us who are consensus scientists would agree that vaccines have done much more good than harm. But there is a population, and it seems to be getting larger, of people who feel that vaccines actually cause more harm than good, that they cause autism or whatever. And these people they're not saying you have your reality and I have mine. They agree that there's an actual reality out there. It's just that you're wrong about it, and that vaccines are harmful to people. They're harmful to your children. And so you should protect your children by avoiding giving them vaccines. And you might say, well, the consensus seems to be that vaccines do more good than harm, but then they have their own experts, including the designated secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. And if he's not an expert, who is? And there are articles in the literature that also make this claim, and they're in accepted scientific literature. So we may discuss for days and weeks and months, but it's it's difficult to come to any sort of agreement except to agree to disagree. How does one make any progress in this situation?
Thank you for bringing that example up. I think that's actually a good illustration of some of the points that I make in the article. And actually, Francis Collins specifically addresses this in his latest book, The Road to Wisdom. He spoke at the last ASA meeting and actually was based on that book. But there's a section in that book where he specifically addresses the exact question that you asked. And actually, I make an allusion to it, but it's kind of hidden in a footnote. The story is actually that there was a paper, I forget what the journal was, medical journal, in which there's a paper that made the conclusion that vaccines, particularly, I guess it was the COVID vaccine, was connected in certain cases with autism. It turns out that paper was later shown to be defective, and the arguments were incorrect, and the data was incorrect, and the paper was actually withdrawn from that journal. But because it was in the journal for that brief time, it got picked up by anti-vaccine promoters and promoted very widely, even though it was an article that was withdrawn by the authors. And so this shows how something like that can take a life of its own. And as far as consensus is concerned, the consensus is extensive. There's hardly any, from what I gather, within the medical community that would accept any of the arguments of that paper. It was one paper published in a medical journal. This thing happens a lot. I encounter this kind of a lot in my fields in climate science and evolution, where there'll be a paper or a few papers that raise some question about one point or another, and it gets blown completely out of proportion to the whole vast array of research and publications on that topic. And then when it hits the public, then you have this either or debate. Well, here's the person saying this, and here's the person saying this, when it isn't a balanced thing at all. The consensus is overwhelming. And this is actually the vaccination thing is an example of where that's happened.
Well, I would agree, of course, that the consensus seems to be pretty overwhelming, but there is at least one group of physicians who, how shall we say, provide counter evidence. And it wasn't just the COVID vaccine. It goes back to...
I think you're right.
Yeah, it goes back to an article in Nature. And I think it was the case, although the co-authors retracted the article, the main author, I don't think, did so. Of course, it was, I think, reported that he might have had a conflict of interest in that regard. But still, we have many people believing in this scenario because it comports with their preconceived ideas in the first place. So I agree as to where truth may lie in this particular case and in other cases like it. The biggest problem is to have a constructive conversation with those who disagree. I don't know if there's a solution to that.
Well, isn't this a case of go ahead, Keith.
No, I was going to say, and I don't have any kind of suggestion that's going to miraculously solve the problem. But I do think there's, and I can only do it, person to person or small group to small group, where you're interacting people face to face, and you explain to them, you show them where they can find the literature that they need to look at, that addresses a particular topic. But yeah, the problem is once you get something that comes out that has the imprimatur of authority, coming out of a professor or a doctor or a scientific journal or a theological book or something. Once that's out there, there's going to be this group of people that are going to grab onto it because for whatever reason it comports with what they already believe. And then it's like, and then with social media, it's like out of control, and it can spread. Like, I think that's one big difference in the last couple decades from before. If there'd be something like this, it would never explode like it does now. I mean, you can have a new conspiracy theory, a new false narrative come out, and in a week, millions of people have clicked, on the. I mean, it spreads like wildfire. And I don't know. I don't have any creative ideas of how to combat.
Well, in the case of vaccines, none of us can claim that there's zero harm from vaccines. Right. I mean, there's undoubtedly cases that anyone can find, and I think there are many cases where someone has a side effect of something, and to prove that it was or wasn't connected with a vaccine that they happened to get at that moment is impossible. So it seems to me that it has to be a case of relative harm, because not making the vaccine available will harm very many people as well. And it's we have to recognize that yes, there will be a small percentage of people who get the vaccines that will get sick. And to the parents and the family of the people who have a problem with a vaccine, it's not much comfort. But there's going to have to be a discussion of truth where it's of relative merit of harm, I would think.
Yeah, and actually, Francis Collins says that a lot better than I can.
He does.
And actually talks about in his book, The Road to Wisdom, that he realizes in his communications during the COVID outbreak that he didn't do as good a job as he should have of expressing what the uncertainties were.
Right.
And that's another thing I think that the scientific community can do better, is again expressing uncertainties, what the limits to their knowledge are.
Yeah, that's got its own problems, because we walk a fine line between, these scientists think they know everything, to, well, these scientists don't know anything. It's like, well, we know some things, but not all. Okay, let's go on. Robert Driver Bishop. Okay.
Thank you, Keith. I think in a lot of ways your paper is prophetic, as you mentioned, and you're bringing out something that is utmost importance for us in our day. As a theologian and scientist, my background is anthropology and studying this throughout the course of humanity. And I mentioned in a post there the growing preponderance of lying. When I was a research scientist and Russian analyst early in my career, I had to study and work in Russian, and I was just struck with the preponderance of lying and how it was accepted in that society. And as I studied it, I came to find it is a byproduct of autocratic institutions. And it is the democracies that enable us to listen, to work together, to be open of the people. But there's also that element that you get into, which is to the indigenous communities. I've been fascinated as Western society. I think we overlook the indigenous community of Western culture, which would be the Gaelic culture. And I turned to Professor John Philip Newell. He has a recent book called The Great Search. And in it, he points out a couple things I just like to lift up. The word for God, theos and deos, actually, the evolution of the word is from flow. Flow of ideas, openness to each other, and openness to nature. It doesn't surprise me that a geologist, someone who works with the earth and nature itself, would be bringing these forward. It is from indigenous communities through the Americas all the way throughout Asia that truth has always been paramount. But it only comes when we have that humility we talk about. The word civilization means to be humble. The word civil is to be humble before one another. And even the word Gaelic means to be humble before each other, to see the divine in each other.
Robert, are we getting to a question here?
Yes. What I'm wondering is, can we, as leaders, I believe that we as religious leaders or academics, scientists, have the opportunity to teach others how to open up that flow, that sense of humility, not to provide the answers, but the processes. And is that something that you had been able to do in your teaching, in your work? Because it's the old paradigm, don't give a person a fish, but teach them how to fish. That makes a difference for their lives. And I think when it comes to truth, we need to enable people to how to discover the truth.
Keith?
Yeah, I agree. I probably can't really hold up myself as a example of the best way to do that, but I do think that helping people see the process, rather than the way, I guess one way I've done that in my teaching is to incorporate history. Because history shows how an idea develops, and why the idea came about in the first place. So, what questions were asked when people were first trying to determine the age of the Earth? What were the questions that were going in society? How did that influence how they looked at things? And then trace that forward. So when I teach the fundamentals of geology and reconstructing Earth history, I do it by starting back in the 1500s and working myself up to the present to show where we came from and how we got to where we are, rather than just showing, okay, here's what you need to know. This is the way we understand things now. Remember it and get it right on the exam. Is to help them see how we got from point A to point B.
Okay.
I think that may be part of what you're getting at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have a lot of hands up, so let's keep our questions and discussions relatively short, because we want to wrap up here at this point in a timely way. But Carrie Harmer, please unmute yourself. Let's hear from you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I would like to take issue with your point about the value of other cultures. And by way of an illustration, some years ago, I was teaching physics in Malaysia. This would be sort of 18 and 19-year-olds preparing for university entrance in English medium. And there were the class of boys and girls, they were doing experiments in pairs, and I would walk around helping each pair if they needed it. Well, now there was one pair of Chinese boys, and they couldn't get their experiment to work. Now, this was when I was a young fellow, and I wanted to make a joke and show off my smattering of Chinese. So I said, oh, the feng shui isn't any good here. And to my surprise, they just said okay and began to pack up the equipment. Now, I think that illustrates that Chinese culture, or traditional Chinese culture, is antithetic to science. I know it's only a trivial example, but I would like to ask Keith if he could give some examples of how traditional Chinese culture would assist in doing science, or if you're not an expert on Chinese culture, some other culture.
There's science is broader than maybe traditional Western science. To me, what's important is people's curiosity about the natural world around them and their interest in understanding it. And there may be different approaches. For example, I do point out Jane Goodall. And when she started her work with chimpanzees, she was roundly rebuked by the scientific community because of the way she did her observations. She wasn't objective. She didn't objectify the chimpanzee. She didn't maintain a distance from them. She empathized with them. And
Well, what particular culture is this different? Would you?
Well, so
I presume.
well, I mean, it's from a different culture, but the Native Americans, the Kimmerer, braiding sweetgrass, the person who wrote braiding sweetgrass is indigenous, and she also faces the same challenge. She has a PhD, but her indigenous approach to understanding the natural world is not Western. And she does it through empathy. And she understands and sees relationships between things that traditional Western science misses because they approach from a different perspective. But she's still learning true things about the natural world and how it works. And what she's doing is she's integrating her indigenous understandings with a Western science and taking the best of both worlds. But so my point is that, I mean, the same reason why a scientist should look to a theologian. Now, what does theology have to do with geology? Well, it's another way of looking at the universe, and it can bring insight. What we're really looking for is the total truth that's out there beyond us, what's really real. And what's really real is very different than anything that we're thinking of. Like,
so you're not saying all indigenous cultures are correct. I mean, it's just a complementary view of looking at things. It can be.
Yeah. Well, it's correct in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to move on because we've got 3 more questions up, and I've got a final one too. So we need to keep them a little crisp here. Cy?
Yeah, hi Keith, thanks for that. And I have the answer to the problem, so
Good.
I'm
No
going to
more
give
discussion needed. That's great.
Right, I'm going to give it now. But the issue is that it's a difficult problem, and I think the problem is especially amenable to help from us because we are both scientists and we're very involved in Christianity. And the problem is politics. Politics is underlying many of these crazy denials of truth, including the vaccine story, evolution, climate change, many others, which I won't go into because if you think about it, you'll come up with them. And it's not just right-wing politics, but also far left-wing politics. In other words, politics is the enemy of science. It's the enemy of Christianity. And I think that if we can look at any issue that comes up and discover the political influence and remove it, we can make great progress in going forward in the seeking of truth. Because politics, almost by definition, is anti-truth. The whole idea of politics is to take a position, whether it's true or not, and do anything you can to promote it. We've seen that happening right now in front of us.
What's your question, Si? What's your
my
question? We need to move on to it.
Good point. What do you think, Keith? Is that possibly come into your view of truth?
I guess I'd say it's a lot broader than politics. I guess it depends on how you define politics, but it might go back to one of the first questions about what's the place of desire for power or sacrificing truth in order to obtain some goal. And it doesn't have to be politics. It can be, I mean, anytime that there's kind of a spoken or unspoken, this is what is really important. This is what I really want to happen or whatever. And that supersedes everything else. Then the science or truth just becomes a tool. I'll take what works for me and what gets me what I want, which makes the points that I want, and I'll ignore everything else. So again, that's yeah. I think it's when truth is made a servant of something else that we're in trouble.
So it's not just other politicians who are doing this. We ourselves are vulnerable to that.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, let's move on. Gordon?
Hi. I wanted to extend the vaccine discussion just slightly to another issue that's very much at the forefront of politics right now, and that is treatment of transgender children, whether by surgery or by pharmaceutical. And it seems to me that the issue there demonstrates why science can't completely answer the question. Kind of anytime you get into a risk-benefit question, kind of to Randy's comment about the vaccine issue, science can't answer those risk-benefit questions completely in terms of what are acceptable levels of risk or what are acceptable, desirable levels of benefit and what are the benefits. Those show, I think, the fact that we have to go cross-disciplinary and transdisciplinary in addressing those questions. I'm not going to take a position, but just throw that out for any comment that anybody might have.
Good point. Keith?
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay. A good observation, though, Gordon. I think that's good. Ron?
Yes, I have no claim to know the absolute truth of the universe, but I do claim to know certain facts that some people deny. And for example, I believe that the Apollo astronauts landed on the moon. And I believe that the Nazis created the Holocaust. And I'm wondering if you've encountered any people like that who deny those sorts of things, and whether you've had any success in any particular approach if you have encountered them.
I mean, the most common things are what you would expect, either but both, young Earth creationists who deny the geologic record, or people who refute or wish to refute evolutionary conclusions. And again, I guess the two things that I see is one, where a certain position becomes a part of your identity. So these issues from a Christian perspective can become a part of the uncompromisable core of your faith. And when that happens, then it's extremely difficult to challenge that personally because of what's at stake. So your whole identity, your whole, am I a Christian or not, is at stake. And unfortunately, many other geologists that I know went through crises of faith because of this. A number of them managed to come through it and come out the other end, and other ones ended up giving up their faith as a consequence. So I think that's a real danger if you you hold certain positions on issues that are really fundamental to who you are. That makes it really difficult to be able to listen to challenges to that.
Yeah. So we'll have to move on. John, I'm sorry. I think we've kind of run out of time, but I want to give credit to you in the following sense, and I'll explain. First of all, I just want to comment, Keith, when you said at the beginning that truth is something independent of us, that there is a real truth. But we also have to be careful, as we know from quantum mechanics, that reality is somewhat determined by our observations. And we have to think through those implications. And here's where John Wood comes in, because he recently recommended to me the book On the Origin of Time by Thomas Hertog, which I just finished reading, and it was dynamite. I hope someone will review it in the journal. I'm not competent to do so. But he points out that one of the key things that he and Stephen Hawking did was notice that in terms of searching for truth, realized on the quantum principle that all of the scientific method is based on our being independent of what we're observing, that there's an independent nature. And so we designed the experiment so that we are always independent. But it says in cosmology, we are observing ourselves. We cannot remove ourselves from the cosmos. And the kind of final theory aspects are, okay, what are the implications of the fact that we are observing ourselves? I'll leave that as a reading lesson for.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick response to that.
Yeah.
And I say that is part of the real that's out there.
Right. So the real is wishy-washy.
So what I meant by that is maybe instead of saying it's independent of my existence, it's independent about what I think.
Yeah.
In other words, that what I think is true about the universe doesn't make that's what the universe is like.
Right. Okay. Good.
And so that's the point I wanted.
All right. That's very good. So the last question or comments, I'm going to defer to Vicky and Janelle, who've said they want to, I don't know, do something, ask a question or make a comment or whatever.
Well, thank you, Randy, and thanks very much, Keith, for a great session here today, and it's great to see you all. Randy announced to us a couple of months ago that he was going to be handing off the baton as the Diving Deeper host at the end of December. So he will be retiring and completing 4 years as the host. It was 4.5 years ago. We were in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and everyone was being introduced to this newfangled online technology called Zoom. And we were all wondering what Zoom was all about. Well, Zoom was not new for the ASA. We were ahead of our times, believe it or not. And Randy, who was our IT guru, had us using Skype, and then we eventually transitioned to Zoom before it even became popular. And we were using it for board meetings primarily. Yet it took a global pandemic for us to think about using it beyond board meetings. And all of our online programming came to a screeching halt in 2020. And John Wood, who was serving as the interim director, and I were in a major scramble and pivot mode, envisioning what would eventually become the ASA's new normal. And it was about that time that Randy approached us with an innovative idea about expanding the impact of the journal with an online Zoom discussion using the articles and book reviews. And we all immediately thought it was a brilliant idea. And we figured Randy was thinking, I don't know, maybe a quarterly session, but no, he said, I want to do it monthly. So we said, great, let's do it monthly. So we landed on the second Saturday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern. And in addition to the hosting, you need to know that Randy actually does all the behind the scenes, much of the behind the scenes work in terms of choosing the content, inviting the guests, managing the recordings and postings, drafting the emails that you all get each month, and follow-up communications, and much more. And in fact, it's been really interesting to see some of the diving deeper stats over the last 4 years under Randy's tenure. So I've got a few of them here that I'm going to throw out. So obviously, it's been 48 sessions over the 4 years. We've had, Randy, I don't know if you knew this, 67 guest speakers. We've had 2,104 attendees over the 4 years. And our YouTube views have gotten 8,324 hits. So the impact of diving deeper is far and wide, and it's just really amazing. And we say God in his providence has transformed the ASA through COVID, and it's been remarkable to see the number of people who have participated, not only in diving deeper, but in many of our other online programming, and really from all over the world. So diving deeper was Randy's brainchild, and it's really been his baby, right, Randy, for the last 4 years. He's been fully dedicated and giving of his time to ensure the excellence and the quality content. And so on behalf of the team, Randy, our board, and the membership, we just want to offer you a heartfelt thank you for your volunteer service. And I'm going to allow everyone right now to unmute themselves. Everybody unmute, and let's give Randy a round of applause. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. That's cool. All right.
So now you'll have
deafening.
Deafening, yeah. You'll have the luxury of attending without having any responsibilities, and you can even ask questions.
All right. Thank you.
And we're delighted to inform you that John Wood, who has guest hosted several times, has graciously agreed to serve as the interim diving deeper host while we search for a permanent host. And we all know John is very experienced and gifted in interim roles. And before I hand it over to Janelle, who will share some of our plans for the continuation and revisioning of diving deeper, John, I think you wanted to say a few words, right?
I certainly do. Just a few, though. Just a few, I promise. Randy, it has been such a pleasure over the years to follow in your footsteps. And
You're making a habit of it.
exactly. And it's so delightful. If any of you have been out in fresh, deep snow, you know what it's like to follow someone rather than to lead the way and break trail. That's the hardest thing, Randy, and you've done it so well for us in Diving Deeper. Thank you for that. And I want to emphasize hosting. There's that back end of the house work that Randy has done so well. And that's beyond my mandate, Randy. And so the team, and I think it's wonderful for ASA, the team is stepping up to fill in. As we have over the years, Diving Deeper has been an important part of the transition of ASA into a whole new way of being. And these stats, Vicki, thank you, remind us of that, of the reach and the impact of what we do. That's our mission, is to bring these ideas to a larger and larger audience, to bring together the ideas of theology and faith together with science into fruitful conversations like we're doing today. So thank you. Randy's done a number of other things, folks. His work on our changing our membership in the beginning, right, and the analysis of our membership, knowing who we are, has really set the stage. Randy, you've been a real leader in this organization repeatedly. And I know I've followed you in the emeritus executive director role as well. And I just appreciate so much that interaction that we've had. Thank you personally from me, and certainly I know from many people I've talked to. Thank you so much for your leadership and contribution in the good work of our mission in ASA. Thanks.
Well, John, thank you very much. And if I may just quickly respond to John's things, it really has been a privilege because the journal has meant so much to me throughout my life, and it has long, for decades, been my goal is to amplify its distribution and its relevance, and to have it open for discussion. Now that after 4 years, I feel as if it's kind of established, I want to see it continue, and it's important for me to pass the baton. But I really enjoy having discussions, and one of the things I'm interested in is letting this journal-based discussion forum continue. But I'd be interested in opportunities for additional kind of discussions in a broader range of topics. I mean, this set, I believe, in my opinion, and they could do it what they want, but I believe it's important to continue to focus on the journal as a topic lead. On the other hand, there's so many other topics that are important to talk about, and I'd love to be part of a discussion group of a variety of other topics, not just within the journal. I don't know how. I don't know what. I'll think about it. If any of you have ideas or something, zip me a note or something. It's not so easy to do if you don't have the resources of ASA. But still, I think there's so much possibility with this whole technology and wherever we go, and especially for us as ASA, which brings together like-minded people from all parts of the world, actually. So. Anyway, thank you very much for your kind words, John. All right, back to you, Vicki. Janelle.
Yes, and I want to thank Randy too, and I'll give you one more statistic. Is in our recent member survey, half the people that filled out the survey had participated in Diving Deeper. So
really?
It just shows how embedded Diving Deeper has been to the culture of ASA, and also I have appreciated the highlighting of the journal, and we are going back to 4 issues of the journal starting in 2025. Good. So that will be good. So we do have plans for Diving Deeper to continue. And thank you to John for being the interim and Randy for setting up the next few months. But we have a job description that's going to be posted. and we're looking for the next host. And Randy, thankfully, has left us with lots of good instructions, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But the plan is to broaden the topics to still focus on the journal. So we'll have 6 months will be drawn from perspectives. 2 will be plenary speakers like Randy has done in the past. And then we hope to do 2 a year with interviews with God and nature authors. And then 2 with vocational journeys. So trying to maybe draw a couple ASA members who have been either taught abroad would be one example, or been in the pharmaceutical industry, or people who've had bivocational careers, to try to open that discussion. And so to broaden it, but still have the focus primarily on perspectives. So if you are interested in exploring this opportunity, please look on the ASA website. It will be, I don't know if it's posted yet, Vicki, or not, but
Not yet, but soon.
Will be soon. It is written and it's out there. And prayerfully consider whether God might be calling you to take it from here. And then I would just remind you that now all of this is made possible through your support with the annual fund, the journal, Diving Deeper, and everything else. So just remind you of that as well at this time of year. And then I would love to close us in prayer. And again, thank you, Randy, so much for your ideas and bringing this to be something that has had such an impact on the ASA.
Well, thank you. You're very kind. I should spread the credit where it belongs. First of all, the specific timing, the 2 p.m. second month and that all came from Jim Peterson. Give him the credit for that. I think the name Diving Deeper came from you, Vicki, I believe. And trying to spread the credit here, but it's really a team effort. And I know both Becky and Dana have been very good as the tech hosts, and so and Mark McEwen. Let's give a shout out to Mark McEwen, because he's the one who processes the recording and uploads it to YouTube, and that's a key part of it as well. So just spreading the credit. It wasn't just me. But thank you for your kind words.
And Randy may be retiring from Diving Deeper, but he is not retiring from being our IT person. So
not yet.
No, not yet. He can only retire from one aspect at a time.
At a time. Okay, we'll wait a month.
Yeah. So let me close us in prayer.
Okay.
Lord, we just thank you for Randy and his gifts and what he's brought to developing the community around Diving Deeper, and for the resource that has then been used by so many. We pray that you give him rest and new adventures at this time of transition, and also that you prompt others who might be interested in this opportunity, that your spirit would be on them and prompt them to explore the idea of continuing this program with us. Thank you for all who participate and for the thoughtful dialogue that is represented here. And may we be instruments of your peace in the world around us. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Janelle.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Merry Christmas.
Okay. Bye-bye. Merry Christmas
Take
to you
care.
all. Okay, bye-bye.